She knew. Not in the way you know a storm is coming when the sky turns the wrong shade of green. Not in the way you know milk has gone bad. She knew the way you know something you've always known, but spent months carefully unknowing, dismantling the evidence each morning, rebuilding the hope each night like a woman possessed by a very particular kind of madness. She knew, and she didn't argue. Didn't fight it. Didn't shed one single drop of tears in that moment. She just ended it. Ended all of it. The begging. The lonely nights pressing her ear against her own heartbeat just to hear something warm. The pleading. The wanting. The hoping. The waiting. All of it gone. Ended today. Right here, right now. This very moment. Taejun, Olivia said, her voice landing in the air between them like something placed rather than spoken. Let's end it here. She paused because these words needed an audience. The universe needed to hear them. The soft jazz from the cafe speaker needed to hear them. The couple 2 tables over who had been sneaking glances at them all night, they needed to hear them too. She straightened her spine. Then she simply stood, put on her sunglasses, and walked into the Seoul streets. It was done. She had loved him the way you love a locked door, desperately, foolishly, always on the wrong side of it. Until the night she stopped knocking. This is the diary of Olivia Park, the woman who decided to stop waiting for someone to open the door and started building her own. 2 hours earlier, she had been so excited she couldn't stand still. He called. He finally called. After 3 days of silence, 3 days of checking her phone like it owed her something, of rewriting texts and deleting them, of convincing herself she was fine, and then sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m. understanding precisely how not fine she was. Taejun called. Olivia had gone to her closet the way other women went to war. The black dress. No, too trying. The red one. Too desperate. The deep navy wrap dress that made her waist look like a wish. Yes, that one. The perfect dress, chosen with the practiced strategy of a woman who had spent too long trying to make herself worth noticing. His text had been brief. They were always brief. I have some time. Cafe jar 6 p.m. Don't be late. Tea. She smiled at the screen like it was a love letter. He called and she came. The moment she walked into Cafe Jar, something was different. She felt it before she could name it, the way the air in a room changes when someone in it is keeping a secret. The warm amber lighting of the cafe suddenly felt interrogative rather than romantic. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floor, and she made herself slow down, made herself look unbothered and beautiful. She spotted him in the back corner, a private booth away from the windows. How thoughtful, she told herself. He wanted privacy. She crossed the room with the particular grace of a woman who had practiced walking into rooms and finding him in them. Hi, baby, she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. He turned his face. Not dramatically, just slightly, just enough. She sat anyway. Taejun Kim was handsome in the way that certain men are handsome without trying. The kind of face that belonged on billboards, and in fact did, which was either part of his appeal or the entire problem, depending on how honestly Olivia was willing to examine herself. He had the jaw of a man who had never been uncertain about anything and eyes that made you feel, briefly, like the only person in a room, and then rather permanently like a ghost in one. Tonight those eyes were on his watch. I don't have much time, he said without looking up. I rearranged my schedule for this. Let's make it quick. Olivia's lips twitched. Something small and sharp moved through her chest, quick as a paper cut. Quick. You have 10 minutes. She stared at him. 10 minutes, she repeated, less as a question and more like a foreign concept. Olivia. His tone was the one he used when he thought she was being slow. What's the problem? Problem, she echoed softly. He glanced at his watch again. I don't have time for games. Just get on with it. What do you want? Oh, yes. About that. Just spill it already. He interrupted. The words hit the table between them. Around them, the cafe continued its soft business, murmured conversations, the hiss of an espresso machine, a woman laughing at something her date said. Life. Proceeding normally. Indifferent. Olivia tilted her head and looked slowly around the room. She wasn't looking for anything. She was looking at herself, at the woman she had become, reflected back in the ambient light of a place she'd dressed up for, sitting across from a man who had given her 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Something clarified inside her the way water clarifies when the silt finally settles. "Taejun," she said, and her voice had changed. Even she could hear it. "I came here hoping, no, even more than hoping. I came here praying you would finally see me." He opened his mouth. She raised one hand to silence the thought. It surprised even her, the steadiness of the gesture, the authority in it. "It's fine," she said. "I just realized something. I don't want or need your lazy eyes anywhere near me anymore." The jazz kept playing. Someone laughed across the room. "Do me a favor?" She said it with an airy calm, the kind that comes after you've finally stopped drowning and simply let yourself sink and discovered, miraculously, that the bottom was not as far as you feared. "Please don't ever rearrange your schedule for me again." She disappeared into the city like a final curtain call, and she had written it herself. She got 2 blocks. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She already knew who it was before she looked. She stopped under a street lamp and opened the message. "You're upset. I forgive you. When I get home, we will talk about it. T." She read it twice. T. She had thought it was their thing. This small intimacy, this private shorthand. She had found it tender, the way he signed everything that way, as if the full version of his name was saved only for her in some other context. But standing under that street lamp, in her best dress, she finally saw it clearly. The T wasn't tenderness. It was a habit of omission. A clean exit. A text that could be shown to anyone. Signed by nobody. She was the dirty little secret. She had been the dirty little secret the entire time. And his apartment, the one she'd moved into 4 months ago, which she had interpreted as progress, as evidence of his love made domestic and real, that too arranged itself into a new shape in her mind. Not intimacy. Containment. Keep the secret close. Keep the secret quiet. Keep the secret in the apartment where it could not cause problems. Olivia stood very still under the street lamp and took a full breath. Then she put her phone back in her purse and turned toward the apartment. She packed everything she had come with in one suitcase. She left his key on the counter where he would find it. She left the promise ring he'd given her in January beside the key, on top of a folded promise she hadn't unfolded in weeks. She did not leave a note. She just left. 6 months later, Olivia Park had salt in her hair and flour on her apron, and something that was beginning to look, cautiously, like peace. The cafe was small, 6 tables inside, for on the stone patio that faced the sea road, and on the best mornings, when the light came in sideways through the east window and the espresso machine was behaving and someone ordered the black sesame croissant, Olivia forgot that she had ever been a woman who waited by a phone. Jeju had not been a plan. Plans were for people whose lives were proceeding normally. After Seoul, Olivia had simply needed to be somewhere that didn't know her, somewhere the streets didn't remember her walking them with someone who was keeping her a secret. She'd taken a bus to the ferry to Jeju, and a room in a guest house while she figured out what came next. What came next was Stephanie. Stephanie, the Korean woman with the English name and the impossibly good bone structure, had struck up a conversation with Olivia at the ferry terminal coffee shop when she got the call from her husband's company in the Netherlands. She'd hung up and stared at the wall for 30 seconds, and then she'd turned to Olivia and said, in accented but precise English, "Do you need a place to stay?" It had seemed insane. It had been the best decision of Olivia's life. The arrangement had begun simply. Olivia would house sit while Stephanie and her husband James relocated to Amsterdam. Room and board in exchange for keeping the house from becoming empty. But Olivia, who had always run on practical ingenuity and a certain restless creativity, had looked at the small cafe space attached next to a small breezeway, then unused, gathering dust and ambition, and had a conversation with Stephanie over a video call that lasted 4 hours and resulted in a business arrangement. Olivia would run the cafe. Stephanie would receive a percentage of profits. The house, 3 airy rooms next to the cafe with ocean view windows, would be listed on Airbnb, managed by Olivia, income split between them. Olivia would convert the attic space above the cafe into a studio apartment for herself. The studio was 12 tatami mats wide and had a skylight. On clear nights, Olivia lay on her back and counted stars and tried to remember what desperate felt like, so she would never go back. The cafe was called Bora. She'd named it herself, chosen because it meant purple in Korean and because the first morning she'd opened the windows and seen the sea at dawn, the sky had been precisely that color. She served coffee, pastries, and a rotating lunch menu that drew from her mother's recipes and from the dishes Stephanie had taught her before leaving. By month 3, there was a wait on weekends. She had not spoken to Tae-jun. She had not needed to. She had thought, in her darkest weeks back in Seoul, that she would never stop missing him. And she had been wrong, not because the missing stopped cleanly, the way a cut heals, but because Jeju was so persistently, stubbornly alive. The wind off the ocean came in through every gap. The Haenyeo women dove at dawn from the rocks below, surfacing with abalones and the casual confidence of people who understood how to hold their breath and come back up. The seasons changed the light over the sea with the commitment of artists. There was simply too much beauty being generated around her to sustain grief at full capacity. She was not healed. She was busy becoming something else. It was a Thursday in October when the booking came in for the house. 3 months. Entire house. Business booking, a production company, the reservation under the name Hanol Creative Group. Olivia confirmed the booking and sent the usual welcome information without thinking much about it. Production teams rented the house on occasion. It had good natural light and space for equipment, and the view was the kind that ended up in the background of things. She did not think to wonder what they were producing. The first car arrived on a Monday morning when Olivia was sliding croissants onto the cooling rack and already half thinking about the delivery she was expecting at noon. She heard the gravel crunch in the side driveway and went to the window. The man who got out of the passenger seat was tall and moved with the particular efficiency of someone perpetually managing too many things at once. He wore a dark jacket and carried a leather portfolio case under one arm and a coffee thermos in his hand. He looked up at the house with the assessing expression of someone who needed to know if the space would work, not whether it was beautiful. Olivia watched him for a moment and then went back to her croissants. 10 minutes later, the door to the cafe opened and the bell above it rang. "Excuse me," his English was good. Practiced. "Are you Olivia?" "The manager of the property." "I am," she said without turning from the counter. "Check-in isn't until 3. "I know. I'm early. Is there any chance?" "No." She turned and saw him properly for the first time. He was maybe 32, 33. The kind of face that had been lived in, not in the billboard way, but in the way that meant something had happened to it, and it had survived and was better for it. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow and eyes that were busy being intelligent. "But," she added, because she had a policy of fairness, "you're welcome to sit and have coffee while you wait." Something relaxed in his posture. "That would be great. Thank you. Americano? Latte? We have a black sesame croissant that I'd recommend." Americano. And yes to the croissant. She made his coffee and set it on the counter with the croissant on a small ceramic plate. He looked at the plate with the mild surprise of someone accustomed to receiving things in paper bags. "Thank you. This is," he gestured vaguely at the cafe, at the light, at the sea visible through the window. "You run this?" "I do. It's good." He took a sip of the coffee. His eyes went briefly wide. "This is really good." "I know." She said it without arrogance, just accuracy, and he laughed, a short, surprised sound. "I'm Minjun," he said. "How Minjun?" "Olivia Park," she said, though he'd already known that. "Production manager," he added, "for the team renting the house." "Right." She turned back to the prep station. "Enjoy the croissant. 3 o'clock for check-in." He enjoyed the croissant. She was aware of him at the corner table for another 40 minutes, working through his portfolio case with the focus of someone who genuinely didn't notice when he was being looked at. She told herself she wasn't looking. She was mostly not looking. At 5 minutes to 3, he closed the portfolio and came to the counter. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. For coffee, he clarified. The croissant. Whichever is available. We open at 7:30, she said. He nodded and left. She went back to her croissants and told herself it was nothing. Told herself she was simply pleased to have a reliable early morning customer because those were the best kind. Told herself the smallness of the smile she was wearing was proportionate and normal. He came back at 7:45 the next morning, and the morning after that. By the end of the first week, she knew his order without asking. By the end of the second, they had moved from transactional pleasantness to actual conversation, careful at first, the way conversations are when two people are new to each other and aware of it, and then less careful. And then one morning she had laughed so hard at something he'd said about a seagull and a piece of film equipment that she'd had to set down the coffee pot. He was easy to talk to in the way that rare people are, not because he said effortlessly charming things, but because he actually listened. He remembered things. In the third week, he asked about the black sesame croissant, whether she developed the recipe herself, and she told him about her mother, and then surprised herself by telling him about Seoul and the months after. Not everything, just the outline. He had listened without performing sympathy or offering solutions. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Jeju seems like it knew what it was doing, keeping you." She had not known what to say to that, so she had poured him a second Americano and changed the subject. He did not push. This was one of the things about him that she was keeping track of, though she was pretending not to keep track. He did not push. He was consistent, there every morning, direct but never demanding, interested but not intrusive. The members of the production team came and went through the cafe in rotating groups, and Minjun knew all of them and kept them organized with the calm authority of someone who had decided a long time ago that things would be managed, and they would be managed well. She liked watching him work. She told herself this was a professional appreciation. At the end of the third week, he helped her carry in the delivery crates when the delivery driver was 20 minutes late and she was going to miss a booking turnaround. He had simply seen the problem from the cafe window, come out and handled it without being asked. Afterward, she had made him a free lunch. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, which had become her answer to things. He smiled, and she noticed she was definitely not keeping track, that his smile was different from most smiles. It arrived slowly, like it was checking whether it was welcome. It was a Tuesday in November when the production itself finally moved from the house to an outdoor shoot location further down the coast, and Olivia had her cafe to herself again for most of the day. She was in the back prepping the afternoon's baking when she heard the bell above the cafe door. She called out that she'd be right there and wiped her hands and came through and stopped. Taejun Kim was standing in the doorway of her cafe. He looked the way he always looked, like a man who had been polished by other people's attention until there was nothing left of him that wasn't for public consumption. The face she had once known so well looked like a billboard version of itself. He was wearing a dark wool coat and a scarf, and he stood in her doorway with the same careful handsomeness she remembered, and for a moment the whole room contracted around her. Then it expanded again, and she was just standing in her cafe with flour on her hands, looking at him. "Olivia," he said. "We're between service hours," she said. "Cafe opens again at 4. He blinked. She had surprised him. "Good. I know. I wanted to see you." She came around the counter and stood in the middle of the cafe floor. She had the impression, suddenly, that the space itself was hers, the tatama floor, the ceramic plates, the sea light through the east window, and that he was simply a visitor to it. It was a remarkable feeling. "How did you know I was here?" "I'm staying," he gestured vaguely. "At the house that Minjun had booked. I asked the property manager. She told me your name. I didn't know it was you until yesterday. I saw you through the window." He paused. "I came as soon as there was a break in filming." The filming. She looked at him for a moment. She had not asked Minjun what they were producing. She had not thought to. It occurred to her now, somewhat distantly, that she should have asked. "Well," she said, "you've seen me. Olivia." "Taejun." She kept her voice level. I don't have anything to say to you, and I don't think you have anything to say to me that would be more interesting than what you didn't say 6 months ago. So, he took a step forward. I've thought about you. I'm sure. I handled things badly. You did. I want to. Taejun. She said his name one more time, and it landed differently now than it ever had, not a plea or a prayer, but a punctuation mark. I'm going to ask you to leave my cafe. You can come back at 4 if you want coffee. But I think you should also know that my check-in policy doesn't extend to personal conversations I didn't agree to. He stood there for a moment, in the doorway of the life she had built, and she watched him understand that she had meant every word. He left. She stood in the middle of her cafe floor for a while after. Then she exhaled slowly, went back to the kitchen, and finished her baking. She told Minjun the next morning. Not everything. She hadn't told him everything. But she told him that Taejun was someone from her past, and that she had not expected to encounter him here, and that she was fine but had wanted him to know. Minjun was quiet for a moment in the way she'd come to recognize, not the silence of someone calculating what to say, but the silence of someone paying full attention. Then he said, he's the lead on the show. I'm his manager. The cafe was very quiet. I know, he added, that puts you in an uncomfortable position. I want you to know I didn't make this booking knowing it would. I didn't know you had any connection to him. I know you didn't, she said. It was true. She could read Minjun well enough by now to know he was incapable of that kind of orchestration. If you want us to move to another rental. No, she said. She was surprised by the firmness of it. No, this is my cafe. He can walk through this town the same way anyone else does. She looked at her hands on the counter. But I need to ask you something. Okay, how much of what you've told me about your life, your work, is connected to him? He answered her honestly. The production, yes, Taejun was his primary client, had been for 3 years. Most of his professional life for the last 3 years had been in some way organized around Taejun's schedule and needs. He was good at his work. He found it meaningful. He did not think less of himself for not being the name on the poster. He was watching her face while he told her all of this. Does any of that change things? He asked when he was finished. She looked out the window at the sea. Thought about the woman who had put on her best dress and been given 10 minutes. Thought about the woman who had packed one suitcase and left a key on a counter and walked out into a new life she hadn't planned. Thought about Minjun coming out to help with the delivery crates without being asked. Thought about the way he listened. Thought about the smile that arrived slowly. I don't know yet, she said. He nodded. He did not push. December came to Jeju like a clean page. The production extended its booking for an additional 3 weeks, weather delays, reshoot requirements. Minjun negotiated the extension with her professionally. Their business relationship had not changed. Their mornings at the cafe had not changed either, though there was now something careful in them, something that had been carefully named and set aside rather than simply left unnamed. Taejun came to the cafe twice more during December. Both times, Olivia served him coffee with the same professional courtesy she served everyone, and both times he lingered longer than he needed to and left without saying anything that mattered. The second time, she watched him go and noticed she felt nothing complicated about it. Just the mild annoyance one feels at anyone who takes longer to leave than the situation requires. She mentioned this to her friend Sujin, a Haenyeo diver who had started coming to the cafe on her rest days and had become, in the particular way that Jeju seemed to arrange things, one of the most important people in Olivia's life. Sujin listened and then said, "It sounds like you finished with him before you left Seoul." Olivia thought about this. "I think I finished with him in the cafe, the night I left. I think I just hadn't known that the leaving was already done." Sujin nodded slowly. "And the manager?" Olivia was quiet. "The way you talk about him," Sujin said, "is different from the way you talked about Taejun. When you talked about Taejun, you sounded like someone reading a language they're still learning. When you talk about Minjun, you sound like yourself." On the last morning of the production's day, Minjun arrived at 7:40 as usual. Olivia had already made his coffee. "Last morning," he said, settling at the corner table. "Last morning," she agreed. The cafe was quiet. Outside, the sea was doing its winter thing, steady, unhurried, vast. The light through the east window came in at the low angle of December, turning everything it touched to gold. "I have to ask you something," Minjun said. He looked at her directly, that quality of attention she'd cataloged over these weeks. "And I want to say first that whatever the answer is, it won't change the fact that the last 2 months have been the best part of this year for me. So please don't." He paused, seeming to find this harder than he'd expected. "Don't answer out of obligation. I would rather have the honest answer, even if it's no." Olivia set down the cloth she'd been holding and looked at him. "I know who I am in relation to him," Minjun said. "I've thought about whether that's a problem for you and whether it should be a problem for me. I've decided it isn't. He's a client, not a version of me. But you're the one who has to decide that." He picked up his coffee and then set it down again. "I want to take you to dinner. Not here, somewhere else, somewhere on the island, somewhere that's just us. I want to know what comes next. If you want to know that too." Olivia looked at this man, with his organized portfolio case and his slow smile and his habit of listening and his small scar above the eyebrow, and then she thought about the other one, about all the times she had come when called. All the dresses she had worn and the cheeks she had tried to kiss, and the minutes she'd been allotted. All the nights she'd spent hoping someone would finally see her. Minjun had seen her on the first morning. She had been covered in flour, holding a baking pan, and he had looked at her the way people look at things they immediately recognize as worth knowing. "Okay," she said. He looked up. Okay, she repeated, her voice steadier now. "Dinner. You choose the place, and I'll drive." A smile spread across Minjun's face slowly, as if checking to see if it was truly welcome. When he saw that it was, his expression transformed. "But," Olivia added, "I have one condition." Minjun raised an expectant eyebrow, but before he could ask, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. His hands hovered for a fractional second, stunned by the sudden turn of events, before he surrendered to it. He wrapped his arms firmly around her waist, pulling her in and deepening the kiss. In the distance, the sudden rhythmic crash of the ocean against the jagged rocks sounded like a celebration, as if the sea itself were sighing, finally. Olivia clung to him, pressing closer as if any space between them might wake her from a dream she wasn't ready to leave. She simply melted into him. Then the sharp, clear chime of the shop bell cut through the air. They pulled apart just in time to see a shadow retreating from the door. It was Taejun. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked away. He had seen enough. Olivia watched him go, but she didn't move to follow. There was no impulse to chase him, no flicker of guilt to resolve. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been left behind in a quiet cafe in Seoul, 6 months and a lifetime ago. They went to a small restaurant on the east side of the island that Minjun had found in his methodical, production manager way of approaching all things thoroughly researched, well considered, arrived at with confidence. It was a converted stone house with paper lanterns in the window and a menu that changed daily. They sat by the window and watched the winter sea and ate black pork and braised radish, and talked for 3 hours without effort. She told him more about Seoul. The whole outline, this time, and some of the details. He told her about his years managing Taejun and the complicated loyalty of it, the genuine admiration for the work, the less genuine patience for the man. He told her about growing up in Busan and moving to Seoul, and the 10 years he'd spent building a career in an industry that did not always reward the people who kept everything running. He had a quieter ambition than most people in his world. He wanted to do the work well. He wanted to come home to a life he'd chosen. "What does that look like?" she asked. "The life you've chosen." He thought about it. "Something like this, actually. Good food. Someone interesting across the table. Not having to perform." He looked at her. "You're easy to be around. I don't know if you know that about yourself." For a brief moment, she thought about the woman who had been given 10 minutes. She finally said, "I think I'm learning it. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from. I hope Olivia's story can impart some inspiration to never settle for scraps of time on anyone's calendar. Until the next diary unfolds, take care.